ਸਵਾਗਤ ਹੈ ਜੀ, ਇੱਕ ਵਾਰੀ ਫਿਰ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਦਾ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਨਵੀਂ ਤਾਜ਼ੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ। ਜਦੋਂ ਦੱਸਿਆ ਗਿਆ, ਸਾਡੀ ਅੱਜ ਦੀ ਖਾਸ ਮਹਿਮਾਨ ਹੈ ਐਨੀ ਓਹਾਨਾ, ਨਸਲਾਂ ਵਿਰੋਧੀ ਕਾਰਕੁਨ ਵੀ ਹੈ, ਟੀਚਰ ਵੀ ਹੈ। ਸੋ ਟੰਬਲਰ ਰਿਜ ਵਿੱਚ ਜੋ ਕੁਝ ਹੋਇਆ ਵਾਪਰਿਆ ਉਸ ਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਵਿਸ਼ੇਸ਼ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਐਨੀ ਓਹਾਨਾ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ। Annie, thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, Gurpreet.
Anytime. So, Annie, what was your first reaction to the Tumbler Ridge Secondary School shooting?
My heart dropped so fast. Um, I have a union role, and we meet with other teachers from around the province, and was just thinking 2 weeks ago, hearing from the local representative from Tumbler Ridge, and knowing that I'll be with them during spring break as well. So, these are colleagues. I mean, to me, they're family, and to think that such a horrific incident that, I guess we're so used to hearing it from the States. But to think of it in our own backyard, in such a small school, in such a small town, absolutely devastated.
No, as you just mentioned that we often hear about these kind of stories coming from south of the border.
Yeah.
But Canada also has a history of school violence. If we keep in mind what happened in Montreal years ago.
Yes, 100%. And more recently than that, right? I
Absolutely.
still think the numbers are rare, but certainly like it's happened before. And sadly, I think sometimes similar circumstances where it's a younger individual, right? We don't know enough information right now about Tumbler Ridge, but the reality is the person was 18, right? So that also really, like, I know that was this afternoon, but that jumped out at me, the youngness of the person, right? Rather than it being like a full-fledged adult.
So do you think it's like a wake-up call for us?
I hope so. I hope so. I have to say tonight's tough because of the realities of who the perpetrator was, and not about them, not about them, but the reaction of specific media, of specific online discourse and rhetoric. Unfortunately, the last couple hours have become very fearful ones. So a wake-up call that absolutely school safety. What does that look like, right? I have to say, I've been pleasantly surprised. I do thank all the enforcement authorities and government for taking their time. I know there's been a lot of outreach, so that seems good, generally. But I'm really worried. I'm seeing things online. Kids are worried. Other educators that are trans are incredibly worried at what is to come over the next several days. So I think we still, that wake up call is going to be nuanced because there's other elements here that I think might shock people in terms of reactions to this horrific incident.
Yeah, right. So that brings us to our next question. I mean, your thoughts on the way this tragedy is being exploited by certain right-wing groups, which are trying to incite hatred against transgenders.
Yeah. That is the perfect word, right? It's exploitation, it's denigration, it's criminalization. Of course, what happened here was a horrific crime, no doubt about that, right? There was never a reason to do that kind of mass scale violence. However, the fact is, what, over 95%, if not 99 point something percent of these crimes are typically committed by straight white men, Christian men. And I know that number might be a little lower in terms of include women, but trans folks, this is so unheard of. And just because we might have seen an instance here or there, that doesn't make it a pattern. If anything, it actually points out that, our mental health resources, the kind of help we provide, all kinds of folks. And so it is galling. It is disgusting. I think it's almost a crime in itself, to weaponize someone's identity and turn around and create more violence at a systemic level, at a policy level. This isn't, just someone making a joke or making a comment. The people that are speaking have power, and they're seeking to almost like eliminate a group of human beings. We all have bad people in different communities, things happen, bad decisions are made. It doesn't mean that you then paint an entire community, we're so there was a target put on these kids' backs, and then to be so sad about that, but turn around and put a target on other people's backs, especially youth. Let's be clear, especially youth. I'm actually quite revolted by what I'm seeing in the last several hours here.
So, Annie, what are your apprehensions? What might be the outcome of this kind of hatred?
Yeah. I think first of all, we need to listen to people
Mm,
well before we have these acts of violence, right? And that means educators. That means having enough counselors in school. That means having, different elements in community that are allowed to kind of have conversations with people. I think secondly, I would like to hold accountable our politicians, our faith leaders, really, media, right, of all
mm,
types, that they need to make sure that they're not spreading malinformation.
mm,
Malinformation is information that harms another. It is one thing to talk about someone's identity just because, like, that's their identity. I get that. But it's a whole other thing to then literally build a narrative
mm,
that puts a target on people's backs. So to me, it's, what are politicians saying? What policy suggestions are they going to make from this incident? And any suggestion that this means that we need to dehumanize an entire group, that we need to remove human rights from an entire group, is not where we start. So, like, it's twofold. One has to be, in my mind, very aggressive, right? We have to hold accountable people spreading that hate because it is hate. I think the conversations I completely understand if people have lost their loved ones and are really emotionally, like in grief and just don't know, right?
mm,
Like there's just no understanding. Those are conversations we can have as we work through that pain, through
mm,
that grief, right? But there's so much malinformation, so much disinformation, and we have a long history of Canada of criminalizing
mm,
queer, trans, intersex people. Like it was systemic, right? It wasn't again just like at an individual level. So we need to educate about
mm.
that. That's what I do. I educate about the systemic nature of these things, of
Right.
how it's not just about, oh, I don't know, I don't understand, or my faith says this. It goes to a point where you are turning it into systemic violence. So, conversations, funding, resources, the ability for communities to kind of talk within themselves and how to overcome the hatred. But I think as long as we're being spoon fed it, by people with power, by people that know what they're doing when they're saying certain things, that is incredibly problematic. And I think in a way, it seems like the police knew that. It seems like the authorities knew that, and maybe that's why they didn't, suggest it right away. And maybe that perhaps is a little bit of growth, right? To not just put things out there before really there's solid evidence.
So, what kind of challenge this whole episode can throw in front of the Pride movement?
Um, Sadly that the attacks like Stonewall, they just removed the flag, that their big pride flag there in the
Mm,
United States. There's so many people under attack in
mm,
every which way. So you could be the best citizen, you could have a sparkling record, right? You are the most impressive human being ever, and yet you're still facing attacks. And then for those maybe that are being mistreated, right? We don't know the story, right? But when society is against you, what happens, right? What are the thoughts? What are the processes that people go through? Some people internalize, some people externalize. And so it's a sad reality that here we are, yet another front against white supremacy, against violence, against again malinformation, and there is white supremacy here
mm,
because it's a colonial context that led to so many people's cultures kind of erasing these gender spectrums, right? And again, it like I wish I could say like I don't want that to be the focus, right?
mm,
So you're attacking pride movements, but you're not thinking about the students who died, about were there mistakes made about weapons and licensing, and I know that's starting to come forward. Like, what about a focus on that, right? Are we truly keeping our communities safe? And certainly, I do not want to go down the route of America where guns matter more than human lives.
mm.
And the
Certainly.
intersection that queer people have often faced mass violence of this kind, mass shootings, right? There's so many examples of that, mass arrests, right? And so it's a weird moment of like all this coming together. And I hope that we can rise above it. As an educator today, as much as there was like some fear, questions, all of that, I think maybe like the last class of the day was when we knew the idea of the perpetrator. That hopefully I saw students being willing to not take the bait, to not believe in that now is the time for violence against the queer community, right? And so I do have hope in that. I hope that in Canada we can see through it, and any politician that dares weaponize and manipulate us will hopefully be held accountable for trying to do so.
Well, Annie, it's a developing story. We might have you back on the show. But
Sure.
is there anything I didn't ask you before we let you go?
Yeah, I just want people to focus on the victims, on the families, on Tumbler Ridge. This is where our focus needs to be. The investigation will happen, right? And then we will know exactly what happened, how it happened, and I don't know about why it happened. That's always difficult. But please do not fall to the bait of those that are seeking to monetize and really weaponize against a specific community. We're all humans. Mistakes are made, bad choices are made, and in this case, the person is gone, right? The person took their life. Um, but I do think like we need justice for the students, the teachers, the survivors. That school has to come back next week. So what does that look like in such a small school, right?
Correct.
Let's put our energy there. That's how we bring justice. That's how we make sure every kid feels safe, right? And I leave you with this. I know that one of the Parkland shooting, the one in Florida, the high school there. One of the survivors of that tragedy actually took their life this past year. So we have to take care of these families forevermore because the trauma and the stress that they face is ever compounded. And when a world doesn't care and they run off with like weaponization and kind of using their stories to hurt other people, we are doing more injustice. We are doing more harm. We are committing more violence against the survivors and those we lost and their families.
Absolutely. Well, Annie, thank you once again. Talk to you soon. Bye for now.
Anytime. Yeah.
Take care.